It's a real pleasure to be speaking to everybody this morning. I'm Tom Rusbridge from the Centre for Research Staff Development at King's. You've just heard all about us, so thank you, Natasha and Sondri, for a paper that was excellent on its own merit, but also a brilliant introduction for ours. So thank you very much. I'm essentially your warm-up act before passing on to Kathy and Jessica, and I'll be just taking you through some of the contexts for this paper. The first one of those is really about academic citizenship. Academic citizenship is important. How can we encourage research staff, or how can we facilitate research staff to take ownership of it? And in this, we were thinking about a recent paper, Maria Tagliamenti et al., 2020 in Higher Education. Quote, research is not the only expectation posed upon academics. Academics are still called to perform other duties, teach students, have an impact on society, knowledge transfer, and provide service within and outside the boundaries of their institutions. And when speaking of this service, the authors refer to, quote, academic citizenship, or the service carried out within and outside organisational boundaries on behalf and for the sake of the institution. So in current research and development, it's difficult not to see this notion of service in the context of research culture. As a quick definition, for all society, research culture, quote, encompasses the behaviours, values, expectations, attitudes and norms of our research communities. And we've already heard about the 2020 Wellcome Trust report and the excellent keynote, but there are some findings there that such service, such citizenship could duly answer. 23% of junior researchers have felt pressured by supervisors to produce a particular result. 43% believe their workplace put more value on metrics than on research quality, and 61% have witnessed bullying or harassment. The second context is about how do we learn. Training courses and development activity are well established, but there is a need for opportunities to put that learning into action. And so as a response at King's to this research culture chimera, in addition to its pre-existing portfolio of professional development activity, some of which you've just heard about, the Centre for Research Staff Development has sought to actively empower research staff as members of 3 research culture working groups. And Kathy will speak through the composition of those in detail in just a minute or so. And the third context, researcher developers are uniquely positioned between faculties, professional services and levels of the organisation. So in reflecting on the construction of these groups, what we'd like to do is resist the negative aspects of Barbara Grant's recent summary that, quote, university managers and administrators seem to be a relentlessly growing class. If not for the role, and this is our counter, if not for the role of researcher developers, administrators, research managers and the like, the central colleagues operating across faculties with the business function in mind, the positive implications of these groups that we're about to describe could not be felt by researchers at various career stages and in their respective research areas. So this isn't an argument for more administrators, but it is an argument for us to recognise the value that administrators, researcher developers and the like bring in pulling together different levels, disciplines and job types. And so, handing over to Kathy for the rest of this paper, we will be sharing our reflections on the effectiveness of this process at King's at the conclusion of the first phase. And we're going to be arguing for a voice at the table for research staff beyond the typical institutional representative structures. Kathy.
Thanks, Tom. So with those 3 things in mind that Tom just described, what we were looking for was particular situations that research staff could get involved in that met a certain number of criteria. So first of all, one where they could get the maximum amount of learning. Secondly, something where they would actually want to engage, because we know that they are time poor, and that there's also a sort of groundswell of, well, why should we get involved with this, because nothing ever happens and nobody recognises us for it. So we wanted something where they would get that recognition as well. And also somewhere where we as researcher developers would have a certain amount of control, so we could sort of frame it in a way that would most benefit research staff. So we were embarking on some projects that we badged under the research culture umbrella, partly because that's something that is a sort of growing interest within the community, and I think also can have a huge impact on research staff. And the projects that we specifically picked also came from the Careers in Research online survey. So for those of you who are not familiar with CROSS, this was a national survey that was carried out every couple of years that looked at the perspective of research staff on their working environment. And we also wanted to pick these projects because they involved a range of contributors from across the university. So the research staff would be exposed to a wide range of other people. What were these projects? The projects were specifically to bring about cultural change, but cultural change that affected research staff. So in the context of research staff, we had these three topics: bullying and harassment, career mapping and progression, and reward and recognition. So a little bit more about the methodology of these projects. It was really important that they had senior sponsorship, so that came in an overarching committee. And then each of those three projects had a distinct working group, and the working groups were made up of a wide variety of people from all the different levels. They specifically included research staff who were recruited by various means, and I can speak to that in questions if anyone's interested. And of those three projects, two of them had managers who were research staff, and those project managers were offered a certain amount of funding for their own professional development activity as a recognition of the additional contributions that they were making. So the projects themselves involved meetings of the working group. The working group carried out various research activities, and that culminated in a report with various recommendations that's now going on to phase 2. Partway through phase 2, we then asked both the research staff and the other members of the working groups various questions about their experience, and we got responses from 4 of the 9 research staff involved and 9 of the 23 other people involved. I'm going to hand over to Jessica now to tell you about the outcome of this.
Thank you to Kathy and Tom. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about our findings and then the conclusions that we've drawn based on those. And so in terms of what research staff said they got out of the process, as a result of participation in these research culture working groups, research staff felt more empowered and more confident expressing themselves in the corridors of power. They became better informed about how the university works, and they felt they had more of a stake in the decision-making processes and in the co-production of change. They said their career development benefited through learning about university management, through networking, and through opportunities to contribute and lead. So to a large extent, these were expected findings. We had set up these committees with their development in mind. But what was less expected was the response that we got from academic and professional services staff who also sat in these working groups. So research staff contributions were valued by these academic and professional colleagues because of the authenticity of their contribution and the ability of the research staff to highlight the impact of poor research culture from personal experience. As a result, professional and academic colleagues reflected more on the consequences of institutional practices that had become normalized and created more mechanisms to consult and include research staff in settings beyond the working group. So not only was this having an effect on the project that we were working on, but also some wider effects were taking place across the university. And so finally, what would we like to suggest or encourage or work on more ourselves? And in conclusion, we want to find more opportunities to engage in this type of activity and encourage others to value this model of participatory development. And so we found that from the point of view of researcher developers, this model of inclusive working groups expands our remit and allows us to enable research staff to bridge that gap between learning and putting learning into practice that Tom opened with. And the feedback we received from the working groups indicated that participation in these groups was viewed as an important development opportunity by research staff. And from the point of view of academic and professional staff, research staff participation led authenticity to discussions and actions. And there are a couple of areas here that require some careful thought and management. And for example, the need to ensure that these working groups are really non-hierarchical and that everyone feels comfortable contributing. Similarly, that there are genuinely equal opportunities for research staff to participate in similar groups, and that you don't have the kind of situation where the same people participate in every opportunity, or the first person to raise their hand gets every opportunity. So we need to think a little bit about how to make sure that that is fair. Overall, though, we see such activity as a form of co-production in line with the step change framework for mentally healthy universities, and would recommend similar activity as a useful part of the change management process. Indeed, we can think of this process overall as a way of not just discussing necessary changes to research culture, but as part of the process of building and modeling good research culture from the ground up. Thank you, and we can take questions now.